Hello once again for another episode on the Amazon Web Services YouTube Data and AI channel. My name is Jason Young. I'll be the host today on this episode that talks about the most popular topic that we're seeing right now, which is Agentic AI. We've got two esteemed guests today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Sean Poulley. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Keepler Data Tech, and we are a consulting partner specifically around helping companies get value out of data and AI.
Fantastic.
My name is Lydia Ray. I'm Senior Analytics Solution Architect at AWS. In my day-to-day role, I helping the company to build data foundation for their Agentic AI.
Perfect. And let's talk about Agentic AI because, for me, it's hard for me to even keep up, with all the different trends that are out there. But, Agentic AI has been one of those things that has been quite prevalent, not only in, LinkedIn and also professional media, but also in, open media. It's been talked about, particularly in, what we're seeing as not just a trend, but very impactful in terms of potentially even replacing jobs. So we'll cover a little bit about, Agentic AI, but let's actually talk about what Agentic AI is. And I'd be interested, Lydia, to get your steer. And obviously you, as a solutions architect working with this technology, how much different is Agentic AI? Is it much of the same thing or is it completely different?
I think if we compare like Agentic AI and then the previous version per se, like generative AI is essentially generating something, while Agentic AI is take even further, like not just generating something, but also like take actions, and it can evolve and adapt and plan, do a little bit more than just summarizing or generating something. That's my take. So in the sense of the reality with the customer that I work with, you can feel or you will know the business value even more with the Agentic AI compared with the generative AI before, because it do a lot more than just generating something for them.
Yeah. And Sean, on the ground in terms of the applications of Agentic, as Lydia mentioned, it's going beyond just generating. It's actually adding, something that provides a decision effectively. Do you see that it's much of the same, though, in terms of how it solves problems, though? Is it just an improved version of, rather than generating, it's actually making a decision, but does it actually make any difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the way I kind of think of the distinction between the two is quite frequently generative AI applications have no agency. They're prompt-driven, they're individually driven. Whereas by its nature, Agentic AI tends to be trying to achieve an objective using that decision-making that you were describing. And so it's always working towards an outcome. So one, generative AI tends not to have any agency. It's very dependent on someone or something prompting it. Whereas underlying in the Agentic AI is the ability for it to make decisions and deal with complex processes to deal with an outcome. So in terms of the is it the same or is it different? It's obviously an evolution because at the core is the large language model brain. At the core, they're really both about productivity, but it's productivity delivered in different ways.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I think another way of thinking about Agentic AI is it's fully autonomous, right? Like you say, it doesn't require a prompt in order for the action to be processed and delivered. But potentially then there's a lot of pitfalls because if you think about it not needing to wait for someone to actually put it to action, then you need to be very clear in terms of what is effectively causing it to prompt. So if it's an event or some sort of transaction that's happening upstream, you need to make sure that you understand all of that. Otherwise, you might be asking the agent to do many, many things, many, many times. And I think that potentially, from a technology point of view, costs quite a bit of money. Lydia, in terms of, architecting Agentic AI systems, what would be some of the considerations that some of the viewers that are tuned in today may need to think about? Because particularly if you were to left the Agentic AI to its own devices, it might do a lot of weird things quite often as well.
The first thing is data foundation is important because, as you say, it's automated, that the data coming in should be good quality of data. You should have a robust foundation. So to make sure that the agent actually behave like what you intended to do for the Agentic AI. And of course, guardrail around it is important to make sure regular monitoring that you need to do. So make sure when you use Agentic AI, it's not driven to the different direction, for example.
So let's talk a little bit about feedback loops and monitoring of agentic AI applications, because I imagine it's nothing new, but there's more of a nuance to that nowadays. So Sean, what's your view around monitoring AI workloads, particularly agentic AI, and what the considerations need to be?
Yeah, I mean, another great question. In terms of monitoring, monitoring AI is something people don't do enough of anyway. We hear a lot, for example, in classical AI about model drift. And that's because people aren't spending enough time monitoring what it is they're putting into production rather than putting it in production. So when you then start thinking about agentic AI, the monitoring of that process, is it continually performing the outcomes that you expect it to do, is a really important topic. And again, it's not dissimilar to with human beings. I mean, if someone's doing the work and they're doing it well, you can monitor it, and eventually you're only looking at it by exception. And then one of the ways that we find that you get to identify gaps or you improve is we're huge believers in product thinking, continuous improvement, continuous development of the use case, because nothing is static. It's a data product or an AI product, not a project. And so that continuous improvement also enables us to capture where there's been an escape and then actually correct it. And that's important because if you don't correct it, you lose confidence in your user base. The flip side is when you get even banks used to the idea of 2 or 4 week or 5 week or 6 week deliveries, all of a sudden they do adoption and acceptance much faster because they're not thinking this is the final thing, that they're not going to see anything new for another 12 months. But this topic of monitoring, both traditional AI, but also agentic AI, hugely important.
Yeah, and Lydia, practically speaking, when it comes to monitoring and then taking feedback of agentic AI applications and then ensuring that you're calibrating the workload, what would be some of the things that AWS can help with that?
For monitoring, you can get the data the feedback loop that you have and put it back into your, for example, raw data, training again the models or doing some evaluation against the feedback loops that you have from your users. And that will help the agent to stay current.
And what adds to that? I mean, with the monitoring, you get observability. That's a fairly topical topic right now. And if you are able to have good observability and monitoring of the process, you get trust. Mm-hmm. You can build confidence, and then you can get acceleration and you reduce resistance. Sounds like a lot of buzzy, cliche things to say, but it's really simple and straightforward.
Yeah, and I think fundamentally it all comes down to whoever is consuming the output of the agent is the one who's going to either adopt it or not adopt it. And it's all well and good that you've automated the process, but if the process is wrong and you're not taking feedback, just like any good human knowledge base expert, they're going to lose that confidence and trust when they're talking with their stakeholders. So we need to treat agents or AI agents in the same way in terms of whether or not they're making the right decision and how they can calibrate. Otherwise, no one's going to adopt their workload, and all of that investment that you put in technology is going to be for naught.
Exactly. And can you imagine doing the yearly evaluation of your AI agents?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, how
right.
have you performed this year, AI agent?
Exactly right. And one of the things which is really important is, so we're talking about the inputs, obviously, what is prompting the agent to actually make a decision. And then further down the line, there's probably some process. And we've heard about this kind of process automation before, call me crazy, but this is nothing new. So Sean, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing around banking financial services, around process automation, and how does agentic AI help with that? Or is it, again, much of the same?
Again, that's a good question. From my perspective, you've kind of seen these waves of forms-based processing, business process automation, robotics processing automation, and they're all very deterministic. So you have to be very prescriptive in terms of how you set them up. And if the circumstances happen as you set them up, it works. The problem is they don't really have the flexibility to deal with things that aren't predetermined. And that's where agentic AI and the LLMs come into their own, because their ability to deal with ambiguity, some have said, is like the brain in comparison to RPA being the arms and legs that do the work. So certainly from our point of view, this is significant. customers know what their problems are. If we pick bank fraud, for example, anomaly detection is obviously well known in classical AI, but when an anomaly happens, I was telling Lydia just last night, we had some erroneous transactions on our Amazon account, and that involved some work for us to go and try and fix those problems. But actually, an agentic system could have identified the anomaly. It could have put a stop on the account. It could have sent me an alert to tell me that the stop's been on the account, and it could have started processing the transaction to reclaim the transaction that was erroneous. All of that could happen automatically. None of that is easy to do in the existing technologies outside of agentic systems.
Yeah, but actually that's really important. So the two considerations that I caught from that is that there's a process side of, in your case, if you detect the fraud, you understand that there are the remedial steps to actually take, which is refunding it and also closing the account and so on. Now, for certain people, organizations, to even think about what those downstream processes are, they probably don't even know that, right? So is it fair to say that hoping that an agentic AI system will naturally figure that out would be wrong? There's an element of mapping out the process first. Like, what's your view on that?
Exactly the second, because obviously you've got to have a good quality of data to come in. But it's like, in a way, it's like training people. If you don't tell people what to do and what to expect and how to behave, and then you don't observe to make sure that they're exhibiting the right behavior, don't be surprised if it all goes wrong. So yeah, absolutely, understanding what needs to happen in that sometimes unwritten process of the things that need to happen is where huge value is, because what you're really doing is you're reimagining the process of how to keep customers happy in the event of some fraudulent activity.
And Lydia, you talked a little bit about guardrails before, and that very much kind of falls into, if you understand the process and you know that the agent's doing the wrong thing and not following the process, then we need to have a way to control it. What would be your considerations in terms of guardrails for agentic AI systems? Like what examples could you give of that?
In terms of guardrail, to check whether is the right action being taken, and also, as you say, is the brain of it is a LLM, large language model, that you evaluate the models that you're doing regular monitor, like whether the models actually evaluate correct things. That's some guardrail that I see, and I make sure it's work in the manner of responsible AI construct.
And that's really important, because you mentioned that selecting the right model makes a big difference. I mean, what's Amazon Web Services take around model selection? Like, is there a view in which we think actually one model is better than the other for certain use cases? What type of recommendations could you make for some of the viewers who are thinking about which model I need to take?
In AWS, we have a range of models that you can choose. You can try a thing. You have to try case basis, which model is appropriate for your specific use case, to make sure that it's actually fit for what goal you want to achieve at the area.
Yeah, and let's talk specifically about use cases. We talked about fraud. I mean, what other use cases do you think are coming up at the moment that agentic has a monumental achievement to be able to kind of change what it's currently doing in current classical technology versus where we're moving towards agentic?
Yeah, I mean, one great one, well, I'll give you two, but one in banking would be know your customer, how to deal with that problem. It doesn't sound like a monumental problem, but if anyone that's been through a loan will know that that is a painful process on both sides. We'll come back to that one. One that I think is going to be, and is proving to be quite transformational, is just the whole area of insurance claims processing. The things that you can do, from understanding the documents for the agentic system to understand the documents, what's the tone and the intent inside of the documents, what is Jason's policy, does it entitle him to do that? The nature of the claim or the damage, is it real? What's the value of doing that? Even to the point of actually paying out the claim. And where I think it will become really transformational is to be able to start segmenting different kinds of claims, as an example. So if you have a high value claim like, Sean completely wrote off his car, you might want to put a bit more thought and human intervention in that. but Jason got a cracked windscreen. Cracked windscreens happen to be the #1 car insurance claim. High volume, low value, very expensive for human beings to process that. So that's a good example of where you'd have hybrid human agent teams where you could transform the 80% of the transactions that are 20% of the value. And just to give you some kind of context, one insurance company we're talking to at the moment, when we were walking through this, said, do you know what? Our long tail of claims costs more to process than the claims that we actually pay out. And so being able to automate the long tail, the 80% of transactions that only 20% of the value, it allows a higher degree of customer satisfaction in those low value claims, but also allows to redirect talent towards clients with higher value claims.
Yeah, and what you're describing there is, for me, very much like a hospital triage system, which is that understanding severity of an injury requires more doctors look at it. But let's use that analogy of like treating or detecting whether or not there is errors or fraud or whatever. How does agentic then fit into the construct of where organizations want to replace the workforce? I mean, that's been in the news quite a bit. We've seen quite a lot of articles out there around these are the top 30 jobs that are going to replace, what we're seeing right now because AI can do a lot of that workflow management. Do you think that that's a lot of fear and doubt on behalf of people who are writing those articles, or do you think there's some ground of reality to it?
I mean, there's obviously some degree of reality to it, but what I would also say is that through the history of technology evolution, going back to like the printing press, people were concerned that people would have less jobs. And I think the reality is there'll be a redistribution of things that people will do, because there are whole new jobs that are being created that the customers don't have skills for. Could it have a big impact on more clerical back office jobs? I think so. On the other hand side, I don't know a single company that has more people than it needs or more people than it wants to do things that they can't get to. So I think there'll be a degree of, some labour shift down, but I also think that there'll be new areas of investment that will come. The other thing I would add is there's a very strong focus on cost reduction, but most of the customers that we engage with, they're really quite focused on how they grow revenue. So to me, I think there'll be a balance.
Yeah, and Lydia, like we talk a lot about productivity and an organizational level. Obviously, you want to make sure that your workforce is more productive and therefore you can save the time. But with Agentic AI, if you were a developer, if you were coding, what benefits does Agentic AI allow developers and data engineers to do better? Yeah.
I think it's some automations that, first of all, of course, like the basic of coding or writing SQL or writing whatever type of language that you want to write, you have to understand because if you just do Agentic AI to do coding, the tons of tech depth that you will have is like too much. But once you understand the basic, it speeds up for doing things, because in the past when we do coding, if we don't know something, we still going to search Google or Stack Overflow or other things to find like a piece of code and then try and error. And Agentic AI helps to accelerate that development process.
I think that's something which is quite interesting. The other thing that is top of mind of everyone is this idea of vibe coding, the way in which you can code without actually needing to code. So you're just really prompting and then an Agentic AI system is actually then rewriting the code for you. Does Agentic AI then fundamentally then make people more lazy though? I guess that's the other thing that we've also heard. I mean, Sean, is there a kind of a thought from your side of Keepler, and actually laziness could be good in certain ways if it means that from a work-life balance, people aren't as stressed as they are? I mean, what's your thoughts?
I don't know about laziness. I don't know, again, I'll just stress it. I don't know any knowledge worker that finishes the day and said, right, I did all my work today. Nobody I know in knowledge work has this finished the day concept where there's no more work to do. So I do believe that people will become a lot more productive. And, if you follow a lot of the PE Silicon Valley thought, The big moonshot is, which person or company is going to become the first $1 billion valuation one-person company. So I think, aspirations will change. Now, do I think a 1 billion one-person valuation company is going to come about tomorrow? No. But I think the opportunity will exist for a lot of small businesses to generate that way. So again, I think it will change the nature of the market. I don't think it'll engender laziness.
Yeah. One thing which would be interesting, and we always talk about it on this channel, is there needs to be some level of executive or leader conviction on what the strategy is around AI. We talk a lot about data and AI strategy on this channel. How does agentic then fit within data and AI strategy? Now that you've got this new construct, which is revolutionary, if you had a data and AI strategy a year ago, does it fundamentally change today?
I guess it depends what your strategy was. Quite frequently we
get called into companies and they say, we're trying to create an AI or a data and AI strategy. And we say, well, what are you trying to do? Well, the board's asked us what our AI strategy is. Tell us about AI.
And that in itself is one of the pitfalls, that people get lost in the technology rather than the outcome they're trying to achieve with the technology. A year ago, if someone had a good AI strategy, they would have a set of use cases that would deliver some amount of value. And there's a lot more that we could talk about around there. And all that really means today with agentic is there's a broader set of use cases that they could deliver against. The pitfall is if people over-rotate and focus on, we've got to do agentic, we've got to do agentic. I'll give you a different example with a bank that we were working with in Southern Europe. They got really excited about generative AI. We want to do generative AI. With another partner, we generated 50 use cases. Less than 10 were generative AI, the rest were AI. And the reason was because they didn't need generative AI. Now, I think we're going to see a lot of that in the agentic space. Well, we've got to do agentic AI, and it will turn out that maybe it's not agentic, or it needs generative AI in its more traditional sense, or even classical AI. So, for me, I think it can enhance a strategy that is well designed. But if your strategy is technology-centric, you're going to be in trouble.
And that's quite interesting, Lydia. We've talked a lot about data foundations, which is somewhat a technical construct in itself. But when you think about foundational kind of concepts for data and AI, what would you think about? We always think about the model itself. But what other considerations do you think about when you are advising customers around this is the foundational principles or concepts that you need to have first before you then move directly to AI?
Okay, yeah, first is where do you store the data? It has to be fit for the purpose. And then the second is how you govern the data, because a lot of metadata, Agentic AI will read, will understand what is in the data, is how rich your metadata management it is. And then, of course, govern the access for the security perspective, for reliability perspective, for Agentic AI, make sure it's not, you can still control it in such a way. And of course, evaluate and monitoring is also important for Agentic AI to make sure that it is consistent, is do what you have to, the agent have to do, and so on.
Is there a view in terms of, you mentioned around, storing the data and protecting it? I mean, particularly the last 2 years we've been talking about, a responsible AI is also ensuring that it is not giving misinformation as well. So how much can we do around ensuring that the data is stored, but also the data that you are storing is indeed appropriate to be used? So, around marketing consent and access, how does Keepler's view around consent data when you're putting it into AI agents work? Because you can imagine that if you're fighting fraud, technically you could argue any type of data that detects a fraud could be good, but that's not quite clear cut. I imagine that there's types of data that you're feeding into the agentic AI system that you probably legally can't use. So what's your view around, a means to an end where the output clearly is helping you to cure X, Y, and Z using the hospital example versus, we actually probably do need to protect ourselves, think about the data that goes in to the system is not being misintended.
Yeah. I think that's one that you could spend a long time on, but trying not to. I think of it conceptually a little bit in the way that data gets used in social networks. in the end, what you or I will feel comfortable with regards to our personal information being used is a function of what we get out. You know, if we actually read all the T's and C's around some of the social networks, that you don't own your likeness or your image, and you read all of that stuff, you'd say, well, maybe not. But on the other hand side, you get a great utility out of it. And so you're prepared to make a trade-off because of that. In regards to personal information, because that's the most valuable, or personal identifiable information that could be used in a fraudulent sense, again, you're going to have to ask permission. So what's the trade-off? Well, maybe my account has lower fees against it because I can automate that process, because it means I, as a bank, can reduce the amount of warranted transactions or fraud that I have to cover. So from my perspective, I think it's a matter of explaining the benefits to the client and what information is needed so that that individual trade-off can be made. And you see it in other walks of life as well. You see it in DNA information. It doesn't get more sensitive than DNA. Some people will consent to have their DNA shared because they get an outcome. It might be a cancer treatment. Some people won't. So I think it's going to become a very personal decision based on the service that is offered.
And because of that, you could argue that in order to understand what service needs to power the outcome, you almost need to understand what is it that you're solving for. And if you think about, you know, the why, the what, and the how, there's been a lot of talk around how to do agentic AI, right? You can stumble across 10 different posts on different social media and 9 of them would be about agentic AI systems. But that's all about the how. But actually not a lot of people really go back to drawing board and think about the why. You know, so Lydia, in terms of like understanding the why, you know, Amazon Web Services and Amazon has been using this process called working backwards for quite some time. Could you explain a little bit about working backwards and how that helps to understand the why?
So like we always do this working backwards, that understand like what is exactly the problem that you want to solve. And before thinking about what tools or technology that we want to use, but trying to understand like what is the solution. From there, we try working backwards to understand like, okay, what is the solution for this particular problem, and then implement a tool at the end. But always start from the problem instead of like, yes, we have this tool and we want to use for something, but we always working backward from the problem itself.
Yeah. And because of that, do you think, Sean, enough people are working backwards when they think about AI then?
No.
Less about agentic?
Nope.
Nope.
Not even close. And the data backs it up. You know, the number of people that get to production with something that their business values, still really small. In fact, I saw a piece of information from BCG that said no more than 30% of execs are satisfied that they're getting value from the work that they're doing in AI. Now, if you had a working backwards philosophy, then you would know what your objective was, whether it was increasing revenue, reducing costs, whatever it might be, and you would have something to measure it against. What we find, and I'm sure you find this as well, and it's a pitfall, a lot of people start with a POC and experimentation, no business buy-in associated with it. And the outcome is, learnings, but no real outcome in terms of the business. So we're big fans of the working backwards approach. It aligns to the way we think about this, which is to have a roadmap of things that you want to do. You don't have to do everything all at once, but understand starting from the outcome, working backwards. Yeah.
And I imagine when you talk about working backwards and how to apply it, the people that need to work backwards, it can't just be one part of the function. Because as you say, if one area does a proof of concept, no one else will know about it. So part of me says that there needs to be some sort of cross-functional representation. I'd be interested then at the leadership level. You talked a little bit about, talking with executives and what is it that they want, and they're always wanting more. From an alignment of what executives want to get out of agentic AI, is there a misalignment from different executives on what they want as their success or their objective?
I would go, I don't think this is restricted to agentic AI. I think generally there is misalignment across organizations. Everybody wants something. The HR exec, the sales exec, the finance exec, well, fine, okay, so in what order? Because the technology team can't deliver all of that to you. So I think it first starts from a misalignment of where the value is going to come from, and how that aligns to the strategic objectives of the company. One client that we're working with, a medium-sized manufacturing company in the north of England, they're very clear. We're trying to grow revenue and we're trying to increase margin. We think we've got particular leverage around price. They have a bill of materials that's an incredible large number. So how any human being could figure out, when Jason buys these 2 products, he's going to buy this product next. When you've got thousands and thousands of SKUs, it's an impossible task. So having a clear view of what your strategic objective is as a company, then boiling that down to what are the key strategic initiatives, and then having alignment around those initiatives is critical, because otherwise what happens is thrashing. And there's an organizational construct that you have to have, which is both domain or stakeholder from the business partnered with technology. And there's a number of different ways you can do it. The other reason that's super important is when the CIO or the CDO or the CAO comes and says, you know what, Jason, you're the CEO, I think we can increase sales by 20%. You're going to go, Lydia, how are we going to do that? Because you're the head of sales. They're not going to believe the CDAO. So you have to have a partnership with the domain and the stakeholders to be able to get that alignment.
Then conversely, where we have people who are building out these AI centers of excellence, that is, one area that is multidisciplinary. You've got different people in different areas basically incubating these proof of concepts for excitement. Do you think that's the wrong approach then, if you need to work backwards? Or do you think you can actually simultaneously have a center of excellence incubate whilst also aligning and doing that longer term type of exercise before you start doing anything?
Yeah, I think you have to do both. One of the reasons you have to do both is the speed at which technology is evolving and emerging is faster than most human beings can keep up with it in an organization that is, an insurance company or a manufacturing company. So I think you have to have these centers of excellence. However, they can't drive the business value. It's as simple as that. And we've seen a variety of different models. We've seen what I'll describe as distributed models with line of business IT sitting with the business. We've seen centralized models where they bring all of the use cases in and it's all built centrally and they serve out to the business. And we've seen hybrid models somewhere in between. They've both got their pros and cons. When skills are short, it doesn't really make sense to fragment those across the business. On the other hand side, things that are centrally delivered don't tend to be adopted as well in their domains. And the model that we're seeing the most that works is sort of like a center of excellence of delivery coupled with domain owners and product owners inside of the business.
And Lydia, are you seeing that, when you're talking with potential kind of AI experts and customers around what is it that they want to carry through? Do you see that they're doing more proof of concepts, or are they taking a bit more time to understand the working backwards approach?
The majority, initially, they are listening to the hype and then they want to we want to do this because everybody else doing it, because the competitor having it or something like that. But in AWS, we always advise to look what is actually your problem, because Sean mentioned, from the problem measure what is the return on investment for you, for example, and then what exactly you need, because sometimes you already highlighted in the beginning, you might not need the Agentic AI, you need the machine learning model, traditional machine learning model, which is maybe a lot more cost efficient for you. But I see because of the hype, customers that I work with sometimes have in a panic moment to we have to do this too. But we always prompting the question, but why? For what? What exactly you want to achieve?
I think that's really important, obviously, because we have representation of Keepler Data Tech and also AWS. Your philosophy at Keepler is very, very similar in terms of being an advisor to really pose some of those hard questions back to your customers. Can you explain a little bit about that? How would that work in practice?
Yeah, so, just like you asked me, so you asked about an AI strategy and we asked, well, what's your business strategy? If you're trying to apply tech, it's an age-old problem. You try and apply technology for the sake of technology and it doesn't align to your business or your business strategy, you're going to have a lot of unhappy customers. So we will try and understand the client problem. That's normal. We are quite good at co-creating that value with them, helping them to think through the use cases, but not just the value of the use cases and the impact, but the effort. That's another one of those pitfalls, because clients quite frequently get very excited. Here's this use case, it's going to generate the most amount of money. It'll just take 3 years to deliver. And by the way, there's a whole bunch of other prerequisites. So we help them understand how to create a roadmap, but what it will really take to deliver that roadmap. To your point, Lydia, if you haven't got good data, you're kind of wasting your time. I'll come back to that in a minute. If you haven't got the right organizational construct, like we just described, you're wasting your time. If you haven't got the right return on investment, you're wasting your time. One client we did this high-level exercise, a roadmap of, I think it was about 15 or 20 use cases. We subsetted it down to 5 that we would really deep dive on to do the true deep design and ROI. And actually, one and a half of them didn't make the cut, because when we went back to the business stakeholders and said, well, what is this worth? And by the way, is it worth more than other things that you're working on? One of the stakeholders said, well, look, in reality, we really need to do this. It happened to be that it was a cross-sell use case. They wanted a cross-sell use case, but what we found is they didn't actually have a solid view of their customers and the products that their customers were going to buy. So to me, it becomes very important that we go through all of the things. And it brings me to another point that we find is very important, that in order to be able to deliver value, you have to deliver across the entire AI and data lifecycle. You have to define the use cases, you have to have the data platform, the ability to ingest it, you need to have the right governance. And if you don't have all of that, you lose, your business case fails. Yeah. Your business use case fails. And so there is yet one other thing that I think is an opportunity for clients, is not to try and solve it all at once. We've got many customers that say, no, we can't do any of this, we've got to build the data layer. But they don't know what they're going to use the data layer for. And they don't know who the owners of the data are and who the consumers of the data are. And so they can't solve their data management problems in the context of that use case. Maybe it was the privacy one that we were talking about earlier. So there's a lot of things that I think companies need to do, and we try and advise them on that, and then we help them with that. And we don't want them to be dependent on us. So we want them to be self-sufficient at the end of it. So, I mean, that's a little bit of the philosophical way in which we work.
Yeah, and I really like, what you said around self-sufficiency, because, Lydia, in terms of what AWS offers, we obviously have culture of innovation workshops and working backwards workshops, but to get started with Agentic AI and using AWS services, we provided different options for people to start using them through things such as immersion days and game days. Can you talk a little bit about that, around if you wanted to get started and actually be hands-on to build out, workloads that span the end-to-end life cycle? How would that look like, and what services would you recommend for some of the viewers at home?
Okay, we have, of course, many services, but I will highlight some of it that related to Agentic AI, like Amazon Bedrock, if you want to start with the generative AI. And of course, we have a Bedrock Agent Core as well to deploy the whole Agentic AI workload. And the other things that I like and I tried lately is the Kiro, which is free at the moment. And it's good for you if you want to try to build an AI agent. When Kiro, I tried, it's really fun, and I would really highly recommend it.
Is that something that, when we think about where we can help out, how much information can people find around these services? Or should they come and, contact someone like a solutions architect? Is there a lot of information out there that we can ask people to?
There's a lot of documentations available publicly. And of course, if it's specific for an organization, of course, they can contact AWS folks like me, like myself, and other solution architect to help build proof of concept or something like that. But if you want to try yourself, there is a bunch of documentation that we have from AWS.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I would reinforce, the information, we're obviously an AWS partner, but the information available on the services is outstanding. So, from our point of view, as someone that uses the services to turn them into something, I would highly recommend anybody to check out the services available online.
Yeah. And I guess like in terms of like how, some of the viewers who would like to get in contact with Keepler, how would they try and, make sure that they can set themselves up for success in terms of their AI strategy for now and the future?
Well, you can contact me, Sean Poulley, or you can go to Keepler.io and you'll see a whole bunch of information on what we call our navigator process, which is how you navigate from having nothing to a strategy to a detailed plan to execution. That's one way that they could kind of get in touch with us. And, as I said before, the things that we pride ourselves on are co-creation of value, delivering end-to-end across the entire life cycle. You have to have a strong team to be able to do that. And at the end, obviously delivering on AWS, you need to have cloud technology, and you have to have self-sufficiency at the end of that. And we're very proud of that. That is what enables us to become trusted advisors, and it's what enables us to continue to grow and develop. As you guys develop new technologies, we move on to the next set of technologies with you.
Yeah. And actually, this is a final question that, is somewhat outside of like the AWS and Keepler side, but obviously the both of you represent people who are very trusted advisors in technology, and you've obviously gone through different ways in which you got to your career, and obviously as a chief operating officer and also as a solutions architect, senior solutions architect at AWS. What would be, for people who are budding to get onto the career ladder in technology, what would be your top advice that you would give them based on your learnings, Sean, from, the past, decades of experience to get to where you are?
My best advice is be the problem. Understand the problem and how you solve the problem, because the means by which you will solve the problem will continue to change. So if you become wedded to a particular technology, you're going to have a career that goes like that with the technology. If you're really good at solving business problems and you understand how to apply technology to business problems, you will have an unending career.
Perfect. And Lydia, what would be your recommendation for anyone who's going through the career ladder in tech?
I will first second what Sean already said. Like, you have to understand the problem, because technology will change. It will evolve anyway. If you just expert in particular technology, when new technology coming in, you kind of not gonna be able to move to the next technology. And the other thing is stay curious. The new thing will always come in. Stay curious, trying it, and particularly in the role technical role, you have to do hands-on. You have to try it yourself. You can't, myself, I can't just advise the customers based on documentations. I should try it first, and I know how it works. Then I can give advice to customers.
I'd give one last thing as well, is don't be afraid of the technology. If you should be afraid of anyone, you should be afraid of the person that knows how to apply the technology to what you do. So if you become the person that can apply the technology to what you do, you might be one of those first 1 billion valuation, one people companies.
Yeah, and exactly. It's you need to make sure that you can take control of the destiny, and therefore you need to be the person who not only develops, but also implements, and then you can be part of that decision-making loop rather than feel as though you're taken out. And actually, one thing that, Lydia, you're very close to as well is the community of she-builds as well. Can you talk very quickly around she-builds and how that helps to craft out careers for women in tech?
Yeah, sure. So in AWS She-Build Mentorship Program, the program started next week, which is 12-week programs helping everyone identify as women to excel a career in tech. Either they're new to tech or they are new in tech, but they want to pivot or they want to get the promotions, a lot of different things, and in different level of career, like early graduate, fresh graduate, and then also mid-career or even senior level. So we help, it's a one-to-one mentoring, so tailor for you the particular mentee's need, whether it's a technical needs or is it more soft skill needs. We help them to excel in tech to make sure the tech community is more diverse.
Fantastic. And, for the viewers at home, if you want to find out more about Keepler Tech or with the She-Builds community, you can click on the links below in the description. But I'd like to thank both of the guests today for talking a little bit about, the revolution or evolution, so to speak, with Agentic AI. So thanks a lot for both of your time. And for the viewers, thanks for joining us over today's episode, and hope to see you again soon on this channel. Thank you.